Hi everyone, Dan Gunner from Insane Forensics. Welcome back to Tech Talk Tuesday, where every week we try to give something to help your security program. And today what we're going to dive into is how to build incident response plans. An incident response plan is a key part of your incident response program and your ability to be able to quickly detect and respond to threats in your environment. So today we're going to go over what an IR plan is, what its components are, and the considerations you need to think about when you're actually building an incident response plan. So let's hop right in. So the basis and the foundation of what we're going to use today for our structure actually comes from kind of a very core document from NIST. So NIST is a US government agency. They put out a lot of recommendations on how to do things. Specifically, NIST 800-61 is the one that's related to incident response and incident handling. It's what we are going to be pulling a lot of the structure out of today. So if you want more detail on anything I'm going to talk about today, definitely check out NIST 800-61. It is 71 pages. There are a lot of details. Today, we're really going to hit kind of what we see is the most important thing to get started. So within NIST 800-61, you have really three key components. So how to organize the IR capability, how to handle an incident, and then coordination and info sharing. Today, we're going to cover the first kind of third of that, which is the organizing the capability. Probably in future videos, we'll hit more on the handling process and on the coordination. But this is a great start for either building your incident response team from scratch, or maybe adding more structure to your existing team. Again, these are recommendations. It's things you need to tailor to your environment, but it gives us a good area to start. So let's hop right in. So in this document, it's important to draw a line between three parts of what people commonly call incident response plans. Again, coming from the NIST guidance, you really have incident response policies, you have incident response plans, and you have incident response procedures. A lot of people, when they talk about an incident response plan, they actually jump down to the procedure side. The procedure side in this case is how are you specifically, as the incident response analyst, going to respond to ransomware? How are you specifically going to respond to an insider threat within this one part of your business unit? That's an important thing, but it's important to note that that is procedure. Today, we're going to focus on the plan level. On top of that, the policy level. So what IR policy is it defines the overarching enterprise security approach for your entire organization at the kind of global level. It covers things like what is our objectives, what's the scope overall, what are we responsible for? Hey, this incident response policy might only cover North America. This incident response policy might only cover a certain part of our enterprise. It's important to have that policy because the policy is going to define what the overarching responsibilities are, what the organizations involved are, what the contracts between those organizations, who's involved, who needs to be involved. Even organizations like legal, like marketing, like public affairs, who actually has the authority out there, right? So in your incident response policy, the other important thing is this is the document where we say, hey, senior leadership gives the incident response team permission and purview to go turn this box over here or off over here if they need to. They have permission basically to go do this over here. The incident response policy, again, is that very overarching document. From that policy then comes your plan. Your incident response plan is how is your team actually going to be structured? How is it going to function? How is it actually going to carry out that policy or the defined constraints of that policy? Again, it is between policy and it's between procedures. The plan is that glue in the middle. It's a very, very important part. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about the incident response plan. Again, how it functions, how it fits in there. So let's hop right into that. So a question you might be asking is, how do you actually build an incident response plan? What are the components? What are the considerations? The first thing you need to do is you need to start with that incident response policy we talk about, right? The first thing you need to understand is, what are you actually responsible for and what aren't you responsible for? Because understanding where the bounds of your responsibility lie will save you, honestly, a lot of time as you're putting this plan together. If you put together a plan for an area you're not responsible for, you're basically just wasting your time, honestly, as you're drafting. And likewise, if your plan doesn't actually meet the entire scope of what it should, your plan's incomplete to both the policy and kind of the management intent with that. With that too, this is going to, with your incident response plan, starting with the policy is going to help you identify, hey, what users, events, and systems fall within the scope of this plan, right? Hey, is this just systems in North America? Is this just systems in California? Is this just systems that belong to these given groups? What about contractor systems? Am I responsible for data for this project, right? What is inbounds and out of bounds when I'm writing this? Some of this stuff will come from the policy. Other stuff, as you work through these considerations, you're probably going to have to clear up. The incident response policy, another component of it, it's going to define severity, and specifically the severity that management really cares about. When you get into defining severity in an incident response plan, it's important to know the severity defined from that policy, because your severity is going to inherit from their severity. And in some cases, they might say, hey, if you get an incident here, it is this severity because of the criticality to our business operations. That is something, when you're putting together your incident response plan, you need to know about. Policy language and terminology. So businesses often have different language, different terms. Maybe it's industry specific speak, maybe it's specific speak to your organization. Understanding the language and the terminology is going to help both the adoption of your plan, but it's also going to make sure that when you do respond, that you're speaking the same language. Performance metrics, that's something that also gets pulled from an incident response policy that needs to come down to the plan, right? How quick do we have to respond? Where do we have to respond? Some of that might require or might depend on regulations in your given industry. So if you're US bulk power system, right, there's a set of regulations called NERC-CIP that defines how quick you have to do certain incident response behaviors following an incident to a power system. Understanding things like that, to where, hey, if you don't do it, you're going to get fined heavily. Those are things, as you build your incident response plan, that hopefully you're inheriting also from that larger incident response policy. Understanding what reporting is required and when. I usually joke, this is the when do you wake the CEO, or when do you wake, in my case when I was in the Air Force, when do you wake that 4-star general up at 2 a.m. to say, hey, we have an event, this is what's going on, we might need to come in. Or say, hey, I have to call you, you coming in won't do anything right now, but hey, the IR plan says I have to call you because of the criticality of this notification. Reporting, again, is key, because if you're bound by regulation, if you're bound by other requirements, maybe it's written in contracts, you have to tell a subcontractor by a given time, or you have to tell a customer by a given time they're breached. This is where, in the IR plan, it's important to begin to bring those considerations in so that you can plan around them. So a big question, what if you don't have an IR policy defined when you start this? This is where you need to work with management. A lot of times, if you don't have one, they're going to say, okay, well, isn't that kind of what I'm giving you with the IR plan? A good thing would be is to go ahead and maybe start drafting that, or start pushing towards getting that. You're going to need to fill in the blanks if you don't have it. In a future video, I'm sure we'll talk more about IR policy, but again, that's not kind of the focus of today, so we're going to move on that. So we talked about inheriting from the IR policy The second thing you need to do beyond just being focused on that policy document you get is understand your unique technical challenges, right? We focused on managed alignment last time. This time we're really focused on the operational and the operational alignment there. You need to consider how coordination and communication works both internal and external to your organization, right? Are you dealing with global sites? Are you dealing with, external partners? Is this all internal? What areas are we dealing in? Are we dealing in, places that are bound by GDPR, by other regulations? Are we dealing with, bank insurance, with bulk power, right? With heavily regulated markets that'll really influence what you're putting into your plan. Beyond that too, are you a site to where, hey, we have these external sites, they're run by managed service providers, they're run by managed security service providers, right? We have external vendors and OEMs. All of those relationships are important to document. It's important to know when they come in, what the responsibility is, how you're going to work with them, what they are and aren't responsible for. And they might actually be responsible for part of the incident response process. Contractors also, right? So understanding both, hey, I understand kind of, what the overarching policy is, but now it's like, okay, based on how we operate, based on how our business actually runs, I need to shape our plan to the realities of our operations. You need to consider the location of assets and data. Am I dealing with cloud assets? Am I dealing with transient assets? Do I have a bunch of cloud services to where it's actually hard for me to get access logs or get other data that actually helps with my incident response process? Understanding where your data is going to be key, because this is something as you get into procedures that you'll get to at a very granular level. But at this level, when you're writing the IR plan and when you're coordinating, this is when you'll say, okay, hey, if we want this data from this partner, we might have to subpoena for them, right? We might have to go to a lawyer and say, hey, I want the access logs from this system because we believe, this event's happened, right? It's very critical, again, to understand your business, because this is honestly how you tailor the IR plan to your specific realities. And you're not just grabbing a generic IR plan that quite honestly might not work when you actually put it into operation. You need to also identify, we talked about performance metrics here, you need to also identify where are the challenges going to be to your performance metrics, right? What are the response SLAs of those internal and external parties? If I have a response at a service level agreement of, hey, I need this information within 24 hours, and you have an external partner, another business unit that doesn't have to get you data within that 24-hour window, you're either going to have to say, okay, based on the information we have, this is what we know. That might not be suitable, right? And especially if you're needing critical information for incident response, you need to make sure in this space that you identify, hey, we need to get a better service level agreement with this business unit or with this vendor so that we can meet our performance metrics, right? Some of this might be making your business unit look good. Others might be, hey, without this data, our mean time to detection, our mean time to response, our mean time to recover and actually come around is going to take a while because we don't have the contract in place to do that. Final big one on this slide, what skill sets do you actually need? So outside of the data being available and knowing where systems are, do you actually have the people that know how to use those tools to actually extract the data out and use it? Skill sets are critical, especially when you're dealing with niche areas. Industrial control systems are a good example. If you have a manufacturing plant, you need someone that knows how to do forensics on programmable logic controllers. Hey, what event logs actually does this industrial software log into? Things like that, right, are very critical to understand, because when you're building your IR plan and you're saying, hey, this is how our team's going to be structured and respond, those are very, very important considerations. So third, we're going to talk about how to structure your team, right? And again, we talked about how your operations are focused. that will very well lead into this slide, right? So how are you going to structure your IR team? Are you a central team to where you're small enough and business, it's not that complex, so one team's able to handle the entire enterprise, right? This might work for you to where as you get bigger and as you get, maybe more, need for more specialties, you might go to a distributed IR team to where it's either broken by region or by, a specific business unit area. Maybe you do have kind of the IT team that manages your traditional IT assets, and you have the OT team, the operational technology team that's, doing the plant we mentioned earlier, right? Maybe your distributed team is, hey, this team is doing the Western US and this team's doing Eastern US, right? That's what a distributed team is. As you grow, oftentimes you need distributed teams to both overcome geographic barriers and also sometimes those knowledge barriers there. Third type, coordinating teams. So when you get really big and you have maybe different entire computer emergency response teams, or you're dealing with different organizations, your incident response team might not actually have the authority or ability. And so what a coordinating team is they basically just work with other incident response teams to clean it up. So coordinating team doesn't generally do the incident response outside of coordination itself. So team structure is very, very important when you put together, or when you're considering how to put together your IR plan. How your team staffed is also important. Are we only using employees? Are we partially outsourcing? Are we fully outsourcing? This might be due both to due to the need for a given skill set, or even for resources. Hey, we only have 3 or 4 incident responders and we have 200 sites. Okay, well, what happens if, a certain number of sites that those 2 or 3 or 4 incident responders can't hit to? Well, we're going to need some outsourcing to deal with that resource issue, right? And what staffing level, right, are those resources going to be at? Are they going to be at 24/7? Are they going to be at, business hour response with on-call or without on-call? Are we going to have these skills full-time or part-time? Do we need specific expertise or niche fields, and how often do we need them? Where do we need them? All of those types of considerations. This is the phase where, as you understand the policy and operation, this is the phase where you're like, okay, what am I dealing with here, right? And how am I going to solve it? So once we define the team, you need to fourth identify some of the other dependencies, right? These are both internal and external. Things like budget, like training, what management buy-offs does my team depend on, right? If you're working an IR case at 2 a.m. and you need to get something done and it relies on the approval of a manager, well, guess what? Your IR plan is going to be, we're going to call that manager at 2 a.m. potentially, wake them up so we can get the approval, right? Because of the criticality of what the IR team's responding to. Management, it's very important to consider them in the IR plan when they're kind of being a choke point of operations there. Legal, right? This is a big one. Who can I talk to? Who can data be released to? What data can be released? What needs to be logged? Things like that for a variety of legal reasons could be involved. And legal is definitely there. Same for media relations, HR. You have kind of your business continuity side, right? So if you're responding to a cyber incident, right, you can actually help them maybe understand how bad the impact is on operations. And oftentimes you'll have physical support staff, you'll have other teams that you're, coordinating with as you're doing the incident response process. All of these resources need to be considered when building the IR team, because all of them play a role and quite honestly in your ability to actually respond. And your IR plan needs to capture kind of the complexities of your operations and how you're organizing this. So finally, we talked, about a whole mess of considerations. Finally, you need to consider what else your incident response team's responsible for. So certainly when incidents are happening, you would hope that would be their top priority. It's also important to say, hey, maybe maybe we do have bench time to where we aren't having a ton of incidents happening. And what are our people going to do kind of when they're not responding to incidents? What this helps do is then say, okay, incidents are your top priority. And then after that, we can do things like, okay, you can help the SOC, you can help with continuous monitoring, right? With dealing with that alert queue. You can help the threat intel folks with what they're doing. You can help detection engineering write signatures because maybe you actually understand some of the environments because you might have been out to them, especially if you're a big org. You'll find incident responders might actually know certain environments better because they actually get out in the field more than detection engineering does. Education and awareness, right? Both internal and external, helping people understand security, doing things like community outreach, conferences, and other SME engagements, right? Having incident responders, a lot of times the skill sets of the people involved can be really invaluable in a lot of non-traditional or non-thought of ways. But again, defining these ancillary services will really help because then you can say, okay, look, like this team isn't just providing incident response. We actually provide a whole lot of other value to the organization. So when you go to staff this team and when you go up to ask for resources, this helps because you can kind of show and be like, hey, look at all these awesome things that we did. And look at it really how much you're getting out of this investment in investing in incident response, because oftentimes, IR people aren't always cheap. And so this helps justify a lot of that investment. So we talked a lot about the considerations. Now we're at the point to where you actually write out the plan. And the first thing I want to say is the incident response plan is a living document. It's going to change. It's good to change. You want it to change. If it's not changing, you probably need to review it a little bit more often and make sure you're actually using it, because the assumptions that you make early on, they're probably correct. They're made off of what you're seeing. But as you actually perform incident response cases, as you're actually out in the field doing it, you're going to see tweaks and improvements that can be made. It's important to establish the review cycles and to not be shy about making those changes, because that's how your incident response team is going to grow and how your plan and program and everything's going to go better. When you sit down and you take all of the considerations we talked about, and when you actually put it to paper, you need to think about all of those considerations. You need to think back to that IR plan, and you need to include the entirety of the organization, or at least what you're responsible for under that scope. All the included and internal and external resources should also be aware of this plan. And this is where you can bring in things like tabletop exercises, like actual exercises if you're doing them, to some of the threat emulation. And really, you want to make sure that the IR plan is not a surprise to anyone when you're actually going through the process. That's key, because you can write the best plan in the world. If you don't actually show it to someone you depend on, and if they don't understand it, they're not going to be able to efficiently carry it out. It's going to cause friction, and it's better, honestly, while you're doing the preparation and while you're doing preventative stuff, to make sure everyone actually understands the plans. In the IR plan, this is where you then take it down and write your SOPs, right? You write your specific procedures for how you're going to carry it out. That'll be, again, another video that we write out. But today, again, when you're writing the plan, take all the considerations we talked about before, put it on a document. Doesn't have to be a long document, but it should be a complete document. It could be long depending on complexities of your operations. But again, if you're capturing kind of all of the considerations we talked about before, and if you're thinking through, you're going to be in a good place when you actually have to respond. That's really the point of an IR plan, is instead of kind of waiting for something to happen and making it up, it's, hey, let's actually think through how we're going to do this, right? And so when something does happen, hopefully you pick up the plan and you say, okay, we thought about how this should go and it actually turned out well. So that wraps up today. Again, we talked about IR plans. We talked about how it fits with IR policy and how it fits with procedure. And definitely in future weeks, we'll dig more into the IR policy and SOP side, the procedure side. But thanks for tuning in this week, and we'll see you back next week.